My children tormented me with midnight calls, and for a long time, I didn't know why. The phone would ring at hours when no one should be awake. Each time I answered, silence, just silence. And then, faintly, like a ghost breathing through the line, I'd hear laughter. Familiar laughter, my own children's laughter. My chest would tighten, my hand gripping the receiver until my knuckles turned white. They used to call me Dad with love in their voices. Now all I heard was cruelty echoing in the dark. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I'd love to know, because stories like mine are heavier to carry alone. The first time the phone rang, I thought it was a mistake. Wrong number, maybe some kids fooling around. I told myself not to overthink it. But then it rang the next night, and the one after that. And every single time the same thing. Silence first, then the faint trace of giggles, as if they were standing just out of reach, mocking me. Do you know what it feels like to recognize the laughter of the children you raised, the ones who once reached for your hand and realize they're using it as a weapon against you? It cuts deeper than any knife. At first, I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it wasn't them. Maybe I was imagining things, hearing what I wanted to hear. But the truth is, you can't mistake the sound of your own blood. A father never forgets the voices he once soothed to sleep. And every night, when that phone split open the silence of my house, I knew it was them. I knew my children were behind it. I'd sit at the kitchen table afterward, the clock ticking on the wall, the shadows stretching long and thin across the floorboards. I'd stare at the receiver, wondering why. Why would they do this to me? What had I done to deserve being laughed at in the loneliest hours of the night? The more I tried to forget it, the more those calls became the only thing I could think about. Until one night, everything changed, because instead of silence, a voice whispered back. That night, the phone rang again. I almost didn't pick it up. My hands shook as I lifted the receiver, expecting the same cruel silence, the same faint laughter bleeding through the static. But this time there was something else. A voice, low and deliberate, almost hissing through the line. 2 words. Check the attic. I froze. The receiver pressed hard against my ear. My mouth went dry, my heart thudding in my chest like it was trying to break free. The attic. I hadn't been up there in years, not since Linda died. Her things were still stored away in dusty boxes, untouched, because I couldn't bear to disturb them. The attic wasn't just a place for storage. It was a shrine of everything I had lost. And now my own children were dragging me back there with a whisper. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My knees felt weak, my chest tight. What were they trying to do? Why send me there? Did they think this was funny? To rip open wounds I had barely learned to live with. I set the receiver down slowly, my hand trembling. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that hums in your ears and makes you feel watched. I stood at the bottom of the narrow attic ladder for a long while, staring up into the darkness. Dust motes floated in the shaft of light from the hall, the wooden rungs looking older and weaker than I remembered. Each creak as I placed my foot on the ladder felt like a warning. The air grew colder the higher I climbed. By the time I pushed open the hatch, my breath came in shallow bursts. The attic smelled of cedar, mothballs, and the faint, lingering trace of Linda's perfume. The kind of scent that can knock the wind out of you when you're least prepared. My flashlight beam swept across boxes stacked haphazardly, a rocking chair draped in a yellowing sheet, old photo frames, a trunk I hadn't touched in decades. And then I saw it, a cardboard box pushed into the far corner, separate from everything else, as if someone had wanted it to be found. My pulse quickened. The whisper on the phone echoed in my head. Check the attic. I stepped closer, each board groaning under my weight, the house protesting my every move. I crouched down, brushing away the dust, and slowly pulled the box toward me. Inside, something waited. The box was lighter than I expected. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid, the cardboard edges soft with age, the faint smell of dust and old paper rising to meet me. Inside were things I hadn't seen in years. Linda's scarf, the pale blue one she always wore in early spring when the air was still sharp. A pair of her reading glasses, one arm slightly bent the way she always left them. I felt my throat tighten, my eyes sting. For a moment, I forgot about the phone call. For a moment, I let myself believe this was just a box of memories waiting to be remembered. But then I saw the album, a thick, leather-bound Bicheyen, oak tucked neatly under her belongings. My breath caught in my chest as I pulled it free. I sat cross-legged on the attic floor, dust rising in soft clouds around me, and opened the cover. The first page hit me like a fist. Our wedding photo. Except my face was gone. Cut clean out. A jagged hole where I should have been. I turned the page. Another family picture. Linda holding Ethan as a baby. My arm was around them both, but my face was gone again. Page after page, year after year, memory after memory. My image cut away with precision, as if someone had wanted to erase me from history entirely. My heart pounded against my ribs, my stomach twisting into knots. This wasn't a mistake. Someone had gone through every photograph and carved me out like I never existed. I couldn't breathe. My children's laughter from those midnight calls rang in my ears, mocking me, overlapping with the silence of the attic. My hands gripped the album so tight the leather creaked. They wanted me to see this. They wanted me to know I was nothing to them, nothing but a shadow they could snip away with scissors. I turned to the last page, bracing myself, but this time the photo was different. It wasn't cut. It was new, a picture I had never seen before. My children, standing together, smiling. No Linda, no me, just them. And taped across the bottom, in handwriting I knew too well, were 3 words that made my skin crawl. We don't forget. For a long time I couldn't move. My pulse hammered, my hands shaking as I closed the book. And then I noticed something else in the box. Something that didn't belong with Linda's belongings at all. I pushed the album aside, my fingers brushing the bottom of the box. That's when I felt it. Cold plastic instead of cloth or paper. I pulled it out, and my heart nearly stopped. It was a phone. A cheap little burner phone, the kind you buy at a gas station and throw away when you're done. Black, scratched, anonymous. I stared at it in my hand, my breath caught in my throat. The phone felt wrong, too new, too deliberate to be up here among Linda's things. My thumb hovered over the power button before I even realized what I was doing. With a sharp click, the screen lit up, and a single number flashed across it. My stomach dropped. It was my own landline. The same number that had been calling me night after night. The attic felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier. I swore I could hear my pulse echoing in the rafters. They hadn't just been calling me. They had planted the proof here, in the one place they knew would cut deepest, among Linda's belongings, among the pieces of her I had never been able to let go of. My knees weakened, and I sat back hard against a beam, the phone clutched in my hand. My children had done this. My children. They wanted me to find it, to hold it, to know that every laugh I heard in the middle of the night came from them, and worse, they wanted me to believe it was just a game. I pressed the call history, my thumb shaking, eyeing. Every log showed the same thing, my number dialed over and over, stretching back weeks. It was undeniable. The attic seemed to groan around me, the house itself bearing witness to what I had uncovered. I looked back into the box, hoping for something, anything that might explain this cruelty. But all that was left was the empty indentation where the phone had been resting, as if the box had been waiting for me all along. The album lay open beside me, Linda's smile untouched, mine carved out, and the phone buzzed suddenly in my hand, vibrating against my palm like it had a heartbeat of its own. The screen lit again with my number flashing, and before I could even think to stop myself, I pressed answer. The line clicked open, and for a moment all I heard was the hum of static. I held my breath, straining for any sound. Then it came, a burst of laughter, sharp and unmistakable. Not distant like before, not muffled, clear, alive. My children's laughter spilling straight into my ear. My grip tightened around the phone, my knuckles aching. "Hello?" My voice cracked, harsher than I intended. The laughter stopped. A silence stretched, thick and heavy, filling every corner of the attic. I thought maybe the call had dropped, but then a voice came through. Familiar. Too familiar. "Dad?" It was Ethan, my son. His tone carried a smirk I could hear even without seeing his face. Another voice broke in, lighter, almost mocking. My daughter, Sarah. He answered. I told you he would. The sound of their voices together cut me deeper than the scissors had cut those photos. My own children, playing with me like I was some kind of sick entertainment. Why? The word slipped out before I could stop it. My throat burned, my chest heavy. Why are you doing this? They didn't answer. Just another burst of laughter, overlapping, cruel and unrecognizable from the children I had once tucked into bed, kissed good night, and promised to protect. Then the line went dead. I sat frozen in the attic, the silence pressing down like a weight on my chest. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. I wanted to scream, to smash it against the floorboards, to run downstairs and forget I'd ever heard their voices. But I didn't. Instead, I set the phone carefully back inside the box and closed the lid. Because in that moment, something changed. The grief, the confusion, the unbearable ache in my chest, it all began to harden into something else, something colder. They thought they were clever, that tormenting me with laughter and silence would break me. But what they didn't know was that they had just given me proof of their cruelty, proof of their betrayal. And I wasn't going to confront them, not yet. No, I would let them keep playing their little game, let them believe I was helpless, while all the while I would be preparing. They wanted to haunt me with midnight calls. Fine. I'd make sure they learned what it meant to fear the ring of a phone. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard their laughter echoing through the attic, wrapping around me like barbed wire. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the shadows twisting into shapes that reminded me of all the nights I used to tuck them in, whispering promises I thought would last forever. But promises don't mean much when your own children decide to carve you out of their lives. It didn't happen all at once. That's the cruelest part. If there had been a single fight, one explosive argument where doors slammed and voices broke, maybe I could have pointed to it and said, "That's where it ended." But it was quieter than that, colder. It started with missed dinners. Ethan would call and say he was too busy with work, Sarah too tired after classes. I told myself it was normal, that children grow, they drift, they build lives of their own. But then came the holidays. First Thanksgiving without them, then Christmas. I remember sitting alone at the table, the roast cooling on the counter, the silence louder than any storm. By the second year, the excuses stopped altogether. They just didn't show up. No calls, no messages, nothing. And in that silence, something inside me withered. You spend decades giving pieces of yourself to your children, carving away time, money, strength, until you're nothing but a shell held together by their laughter and their love. And then, one day, you wake up and realize they've taken it all and left you empty. I kept asking myself what I'd done wrong. Was it something I said? Something I didn't say? After Linda passed, I tried to hold the family together the way she always had, but maybe I wasn't enough. Maybe in their eyes, I was just the weak one, the man who'd lost his wife and couldn't fill the silence she left behind. And now here they were, laughing at me through phone lines, turning my loneliness into a game. It wasn't enough for them to leave me behind. They wanted to erase me, to remind me with every ring that I was nothing more than a ghost in their world. But as I lay in the dark that night, one thought kept me awake more than any laughter. If they had chosen cruelty, then I would choose something else, something sharper, something they would never see coming. By the next morning, the decision was already made. I wasn't going to sit by the phone waiting for their games to eat me alive. If they wanted to use this little device against me, then I'd turn it back on them. The burner phone sat on the table in front of me, small and ordinary, but it might as well have been a loaded weapon. I turned it over in my hands again and again, my coffee untouched and cold beside me. I pressed the call button, dialing my landline. The house phone rang across the kitchen, its shrill tone cutting through the silence. My stomach twisted as I reached out and answered, hearing my own voice echo faintly back through the burner's speaker. That was all the proof I need. Dead. Every late-night call, every cruel burst of laughter had come from this cheap piece of plastic. But I wasn't satisfied with knowing. I needed to hear it again, to burn the truth into my mind so there could never be doubt. I set the phone down and waited. The minutes crawled by. The clock over the stove ticked too loud, every second dragging on until my nerves felt stretched to breaking. Then, like a spark in dry grass, the burner phone lit up. Incoming call. My landline again. My hand shook as I answered. Silence. Then, clear as day, laughter. Not faint this time, not distant. Right there in my ear, so close I could almost see their smirking faces. Ethan's chuckle, low and cruel. Sarah's sharper, cutting in like glass. My chest ached, my throat burned, but I didn't hang up. I let it play. I let their mockery pour into me until I could barely breathe. And then Ethan spoke, just one word, dripping with venom. Pathetic. The line went dead. I sat frozen, the receiver pressed against my ear, the word echoing in my skull like a bell tolling the end of something sacred. My son. The boy I had carried on my shoulders through county fairs. The boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, had just called me pathetic like I was less than a stranger. I lowered the phone slowly, my breath unsteady. They thought they had won, that every laugh, every whisper was another nail in my coffin, but they didn't know what they had done. They had taken the last fragile piece of me and crushed it, and in its place, something harder began to grow. That night I sat in the living room with every light off, the house wrapped in shadow. The burner phone lay on the coffee table in front of me, its black screen reflecting the faint glow of the streetlight through the curtains. My fists clenched and unclenched on my knees. Every part of me wanted to pick up the phone, call Ethan, scream down the line until my voice broke. I wanted to demand answers, to ask how the children I raised could twist into strangers cruel enough to torment their own father. But I didn't. I knew if I gave in to that impulse, they would win. Confrontation would only feed their hunger. They wanted me rattled, broken, desperate. They wanted proof that their laughter had sunk its teeth into me. So instead, I let the silence sit heavy, filling the space where my anger wanted to roar. I stared at that phone until the shadows blurred, and a thought settled in my chest like a stone dropped into water. If they wanted a game, I would give them one, but it wouldn't be the kind they controlled. I leaned back, my eyes fixed on the ceiling, the weight of years pressing down. I thought about every Sunday dinner I'd cooked alone, every empty chair at holidays, every unanswered call. I thought about how many times I'd defended them to neighbors, to friends, telling myself they were just busy, just caught up in life. And now, here was the truth laid bare. They weren't busy. They weren't caught up. They had chosen this. They had chosen to cut me out, to erase me from photos, from memories, from their lives. And now, they wanted to remind me of that choice every night with the shrill ring of the phone. I picked it up one last time, turning it over slowly. A small, ordinary device. Yet in their hands, it had become a weapon, a tool to carve me deeper than any blade could. My pulse slowed, my jaw tightened, and the first spark of an idea flickered to life. I wasn't going to destroy it. No, I was going to keep it, nurture it, turn their weapon back on them until every ring clawed at their nerves, until the same sound that once made them laugh left them cold with fear. They thought they had written the rules of this cruel game. They had no idea the game had just changed. I drove into town the next day with a plan forming so sharp in my mind it felt almost foreign, like someone else had whispered it into my ear. The streets were quiet, the kind of morning where the air still carried a chill that made every breath visible. I pulled into the parking lot of a gas station that sat just off the highway, the kind of place where no one remembers your face and no one asks questions. Inside, tucked between racks of dusty snacks and windshield wiper fluid, was a display of prepaid burner phones, rows of them, sealed in plastic, cheap and forgettable. I bought 2, cash, no paper trail. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table with the blinds half drawn, the phones lined up in front of me like tools waiting to be sharpened. One was theirs, the black little demon they had used to rattle me night after night. The other, brand new, still wrapped, my weapon. My hand hovered over it for a long time before tearing it open, the plastic crackling in the silence. I spent hours setting it up, recording my voice in messages that sent chills down even my own spine when I played them back. Not long sentences, nothing that could be brushed off as coincidence, just fragments. Words meant to burrow under the skin and fester there. I know what you did. Check the attic. You can't erase me. My voice stripped of warmth, stripped of everything they once trusted, until all that remained was the echo of a ghost they had created themselves. When the recordings were ready, I practiced. I dialed their numbers, let it ring once, then hung up. I sent the messages at odd hours, the kind of times when the world feels still and fragile. Just before dawn, just after midnight, when the mind is weakest. I imagined Ethan, phone buzzing on his nightstand, groggy hand reaching for it only to hear my hollow voice spill through the speaker. I imagined Sarah's smile faltering when she played a message that said exactly what she'd told me through the attic whispers. It wasn't enough to frighten them. I wanted them to doubt themselves, to feel the same weight of paranoia that had sat on my chest night after night. I wanted them to jump at every ring, every vibration, until their laughter died in their throats. The game they started wasn't over. It had only just begun. The first call went out on a Tuesday night. I chose the time carefully, just after 2 a.m, when the body is at its weakest, when even the strongest mind struggles to separate dreams from reality. The phone in pat. My hand felt heavier than it should have, my thumb hovering over the dial before I finally pressed it. The line rang once, twice, and then I let the recording play, my own voice, stripped of all softness, spilling through the speaker. "I know what you did in the attic." I ended the call before they could answer. Silence filled the room around me, the only sound the ticking of the clock above the stove. I sat there waiting, imagining the confusion flickering across Ethan's face when he picked up, Sarah's wide eyes darting toward him, both of them realizing this wasn't just a prank anymore. The hunter had become the hunted. I didn't have to wait long. The next evening, the burner phone buzzed with a message, a single text from an unknown number. "Who is this?" I stared at the screen until the words blurred, a smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. They were rattled. The laughter was gone. I ignored the message. Ignoring them was part of the plan. Fear grows fastest in silence. I let a day pass, then two. And on the third night, I called again. Same words, same voice. "I know what you did in the attic." This time, I let the silence stretch after the message played. I heard a breath on the other end, shaky and unsteady, before I hung up. It was working. The very sound they once used to torment me was now cutting them open from the inside. Every ring, every buzz of their phones would carry the weight of my voice, a reminder that they hadn't just erased me from their photos. They had awakened something in me that wouldn't rest until they paid. I set the phone down gently on the table. My reflection caught faintly in the black screen. For the first time in years, I didn't feel weak. I didn't feel forgotten. I felt steady. They thought they could strip me away like I was nothing. Now, every time their phones rang in the dead of night, they would know the truth. Nothing haunts you quite like the ghost of a father you tried to bury alive. The next time I called, I didn't hang up right away. I let the recording play. "I know what you did in the attic." And then I stayed on the line, silent. What I heard next was worth every sleepless night they'd put me through. "Who is this?" Ethan's voice, sharp, angry, but not steady. He tried to sound in control, but I could hear the cracks. Sarah's voice overlapped his, pitched higher. "It's him! I swear it's him!" Her words shook, laced with panic. Him. They meant me, and they were right. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, drinking in their fear like a man dying of thirst. Ethan cursed under his breath. "It's just some sick joke. Forget it." But Sarah didn't let it go. No, you heard it. He said the attic. He knows." They didn't laugh this time, not once. And when Ethan finally hung up, I sat there in the dark, my hands steady, my pulse calm. The same voices that had once ridiculed me in the middle of the night were now trembling, breaking. I recorded every word, saving it, tucking it away like ammunition, proof of what they had done, proof of who they really were. And as I sat there, a memory surfaced. The day of Linda's funeral. I had stood by her casket, hollowed out, my hand resting on the polished wood, trying to remember how to breathe without her. People moved around me, whispers of condolences, hands on my shoulder I barely felt. And then Ethan's voice, cutting through it all. "Dad, step back. This is for family only." Family. As if I wasn't. As if the decades I spent loving her, building a life with her, raising the children she gave me, none of it counted. He had shoved me aside in front of everyone, his eyes cold, his hand firm on my chest. I can still feel the sting of that push, the way the ground seemed to tilt under me, the way the air seemed to vanish. My own son, treating me like an intruder at my wife's farewell. And Sarah had said nothing. She'd just looked away, lips pressed thin, like she agreed, like I was already gone, already erased. Now, as their voices cracked with fear over a phone line, I felt something close to justice. The laughter that once mocked me had turned into gasps and whispers. The balance was shifting, one call at a time. I didn't stop with the nights. Nights were too easy, too predictable. Fear loses its edge if it only comes when the world is dark. No, I wanted them to feel it everywhere, at every hour, until there was no safe corner left in their lives. So I began timing the calls differently. A Monday morning when Ethan would be buried in meetings. A Saturday afternoon when Sarah would be out with friends. Times when the ring of a phone was supposed to mean business, or laughter, or nothing at all. The first daytime strike hit Ethan. I called his office phone, let it ring twice, then played the recording. "You can't erase me." I pictured him stiffening in his chair, colleagues turning their heads, wondering why his face had drained of color. I didn't need to see it. I could hear it in the pause that followed, in the sharp intake of breath he forgot to mute before slamming the call dead. Sarah was easier. She lived her life online, every movement broadcast for anyone willing to watch. Through her posts, I knew when she was at brunch, when she was walking downtown, when she was laughing over wine with her friends. That afternoon, her laughter had barely begun before I called. The recording whispered through the line, "I'm still here." She answered with a laugh at first, thinking it was one of her friends. But when my voice kept repeating, hollow and steady, the laughter broke. I heard her voice drop, sharp, panicked. "Stop calling me! Stop it!" Her friend's confusion filtered faintly in the background, asking if she was okay. The line cut, but I knew she wasn't. I didn't flood them with calls. That would have been too obvious, too easy to explain away. Instead, I spaced them out, irregular, unpredictable. Some days passed in silence, enough to give them hope it was over. Then, just as the tension began to ease, I'd strike again, every time their phone lit up with an unknown number. I knew their hearts raced the way mine once had. The difference was simple. They didn't know when the next ring would come. I did. I controlled it. And for the first time in years, the power was mine. There's a certain cruelty in the way children can wound you. Strangers can insult you. Enemies can strike you. But children know exactly where to cut. They know the soft places, the ones you spent years opening up for them. They know the words that can turn your heart to ash because you were the one who taught them how to speak in the first place. When Ethan called me pathetic, it wasn't just a word. It was the sum of everything he thought I was worth. And Sarah's silence at the funeral, that wasn't just grief. That was agreement. Agreement that I didn't belong, that I was something to push aside, to erase like pencil marks from a page. I used to think being a father was about sacrifice. You give them the bigger slice of pie. You let them sleep in the warm bed while you take the drafty couch. You work the long hours, tear up your back, wear your hands raw so they can have new shoes, a warm jacket, a chance at something better. You tell yourself it's worth it, because one day they'll understand. One day, when they're older, they'll see all the little things you did for them, and they'll love you all the more for it. But no one tells you there's another ending. No one warns you that sometimes, when the children grow, they don't look back with gratitude. Sometimes they look back with contempt, with blame, with eyes that see you not as the man who carried them, but as the man who failed them in ways you'll never fully understand. I spent years trying to figure out what I had done wrong. Maybe I wasn't patient enough. Maybe I was too stern. Maybe I didn't hug them enough after Linda died. I went in circles, tearing myself apart with maybes, because it was easier to believe I had failed than to believe they had chosen cruelty for no reason at all. But now, listening to their panic through the phone, I realized something I should have seen long ago. They hadn't erased me because of what I lacked. They erased me because they could. Because power feels intoxicating when you've never tasted it before, and what better way to feel strong than to make someone else small? And that's when I knew. They hadn't just cut me out of photographs. They had cut me out of their hearts. And for that, there was no forgiveness left in me to give. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. The silence between my calls worked better than the calls themselves. Fear grows teeth in the quiet, chewing on the mind until it gnaws through reason. I imagined Ethan pacing his office, staring at his phone like it might explode. I pictured Sarah checking every unknown number twice, deleting voicemails without listening, her nerves strung so tight they hummed. One night I called and didn't say a word, no recording, no whisper, just silence. I let the line stay open. At first nothing, then Sarah's voice, brittle. "It's you, isn't it?" A pause. Then Ethan, defensive. "What the hell are you talking about?" You're the one doing this. You bought some stupid phone and now you're trying to scare me." I almost laughed, sitting there in the dark, listening as the trap tightened. My children, turning their knives on each other, never once thinking the hand holding the blade might be mine. Ethan snapped, his voice low but sharp. "You think I've got time for this? You think I'd waste my nights on you?" Sarah's breathing was ragged, her panic spilling out in every syllable. "He said the attic. How else would anyone know, unless you told him?" Their voices overlapped, harsh, accusing, until the call cut off with a burst of static. I sat very still, the burner phone warm in my palm, a strange calm settling over me. They weren't laughing anymore. They weren't united. They were unraveling, thread by thread, turning suspicion inward, because they couldn't bring themselves to face the truth, that it was their father who had stepped into the shadows and seized control. The thought of them lying awake, staring at each other with mistrust, gave me a kind of satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. They wanted me to feel alone, erased, forgotten, but now they were the ones isolated, unable to trust even each other. I leaned back in my chair, the silence of the house pressing close around me. For the first time in a long while, it didn't feel suffocating, it felt like company. Their fear was here with me, stitched into every quiet moment, proof that they couldn't escape me no matter how hard they tried. They thought they had cut me out, but now I was in their heads, and there was no cutting me free. The calls piled up like stones, each one heavier than the last. Not for me, no, not anymore, but for them, for Ethan, who now barked his words through clenched teeth when he thought no one could hear the tremor beneath, for Sarah, whose voice quavered, brittle as glass, whenever she thought the line was empty. I had them. Every word, every broken syllable, captured and saved. The recordings became my armor. On one, Ethan's hissed curse as he answered in the middle of a meeting, the murmur of colleagues in the background. On another, Sarah's sharp cry, cut off by the clink of glasses and confused voices at a restaurant. And the best of all, the night they turned on each other, accusing, snapping, suspicion dripping like venom. Each file sat neatly labeled on my computer, a library of their cruelty, twisted back into weakness. But evidence is nothing if it stays hidden. What good is proof if the world never sees it? I needed more than fear in their private moments. I wanted the mask ripped away in front of everyone they respected, everyone who had once looked at them and seen charm instead of rot. That chance came sooner than I expected. A family gathering, a cousin's wedding, the kind of event that drags everyone out whether they want to be there or not. I received the invitation out of obligation, no doubt. A half-hearted gesture so they wouldn't look heartless in front of extended family. They didn't expect me to come. They thought I'd stay home, sitting in the dark, waiting for their calls. But I went, and I went prepared. In my pocket, I carried a small speaker, no bigger than a wallet, loaded with the recordings that had once shredded my nights, their laughter, their whispers, their cruelty, captured in perfect clarity. I pictured it even as I stood in my kitchen. Days before the event, the device heavy in my hand, the moment their polished smiles cracked, the moment their cousins, aunts, and uncles heard what kind of children they really were. For years they had erased me, silenced me, turned me into nothing more than a ghost. But ghosts have a way of returning when the living least expect it, and I was going to haunt them in broad daylight. The day of the wedding came draped in sunlight, the kind of warm, golden glow that makes everything look gentler than it is. I dressed slowly, choosing my best suit, one Linda had always liked. It fit a little looser now, but that didn't matter. What mattered was what I carried in the inside pocket, the small black speaker, fully charged, loaded with every cruel sound my children had sent through those midnight calls. My heart beat steady, not with nerves but with purpose. When I arrived, the venue was already buzzing. Laughter spilled out from the banquet hall, mingling with the faint hum of a string quartet playing near the entrance. Families clustered in little knots, greeting, hugging, catching up on years of absence. I saw cousins I hadn't laid eyes on in decades, aunts with hair gone silver, uncles leaning heavier on canes, and then I saw them, Ethan and Sarah, standing together near the bar, their smiles polished, their laughter practiced. To anyone else they looked perfect. To me, they looked hollow. I stayed at the edge of the room, unnoticed. That had become my specialty over the years, blending into corners, fading into the background while my children took center stage. It almost felt natural. Almost. But tonight, the corner wasn't where I would remain. As the evening stretched on, the speeches began. Toasts from the groom's side, a few nervous jokes from the bride's younger brother, the kind of sweet chaos that comes with any wedding. I waited, patient, my hand brushing the outline of the speaker in my pocket like a man feeling for a weapon. The time had to be perfect, not too soon, not too late. It needed to strike like a bell in the middle of a hymn. And then the opportunity came, a lull in the chatter, the clinking of glasses tapering off as the microphone passed from one relative to another. A quiet moment that begged to be filled. I slipped my hand into my pocket, my thumb finding the button by memory. My pulse didn't race, my breathing stayed even. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. Ethan and Sarah raised their glasses, oblivious. Their faces shone under the lights, masks of pride and poise. They had no idea the walls were about to come crashing down. The moment was as quiet as I needed it to be. I slipped the speaker from my pocket, set it gently on the table beside me, and pressed play. At first, nothing but a low hiss, the kind of background static most people would dismiss. Heads turned, confused, searching for the source. And then, cutting through the quiet like glass shattering, came the sound of laughter. Not the kind of laughter that belongs at a wedding, not joyful or light-hearted. This was different, cold, sharp, cruel. My children's laughter echoing from the tiny box in front of me, filling the hall until every conversation stilled. The sound carried, bouncing off the walls, turning every face to Ward, Ethan, and Sarah. The next recording rolled seamlessly, Ethan's voice dripping with contempt. Pathetic. Gasps rose from the tables nearest them. A murmur rippled through the crowd like a wave breaking against rocks. Sarah's voice followed, brittle, desperate. "Stop calling me! Stop it!" Confusion deepened into something else. Suspicion, judgment, disgust. I watched them from across the room. At first, they froze, eyes wide, masks slipping. Then Ethan moved, fast, his hand clamping on Sarah's arm as if he could anchor her in place. But the damage was already done. Another clip spilled into the room, their voices overlapping, accusing each other. "It's you, isn't it? You told him!" Every word stripped away the polish they had worn like armor. The room turned on them slowly, dozens of faces narrowing, whispers growing louder, each guest piecing together the puzzle. They had mocked me, tormented me, laughed at the man who raised them, and now the whole family knew. I stayed where I was, leaning back in my chair, letting the scene unfold. The speaker did the talking for me, replaying nights of humiliation they thought would stay buried in shadows. No one was laughing now, not a single soul. By the time I clicked the button and silence reclaimed the hall, Ethan and Sarah were pale, their smiles gone, their glasses trembling in their hands. They looked smaller than I had ever seen them, smaller than children. I slipped the speaker back into my pocket, calm, steady. For years they had erased me. Tonight, I erased them. For a long moment, the hall was dead silent. Forks rested midair, glasses hovered half-raised, conversations turned to dust in people's throats. The only sound was the echo of my children's voices still clinging to the walls, like smoke after a fire. Then came the whispers, dozens of them, sharp and cutting, like blades slicing through fabric. Was that Ethan? He called his father pathetic? Sarah. She sounded terrified. The words spread faster than wildfire, eyes narrowing, mouths tightening, heads turning toward the two of them, as though the crowd had suddenly remembered who they really were. Ethan tried to speak first, his voice forced into a laugh, brittle as broken glass. "It's fake. Someone spliced recordings together. That's not—" But no one bought it. His eyes darted too quickly, his hand gripped his glass too tight, his voice cracked just enough to betray him. Sarah stepped forward, her face blotched with color. "This is twisted. He's trying to make us look bad. You all know what he's like. He's bitter. Her words faltered when she realized no one was nodding. No one was on her side. Instead, her cousins exchanged uneasy glances. Her aunts and uncles shook their heads. Lips pursed in disapproval. Even the bride and groom, caught in the middle of the spectacle, looked stricken, their wedding hijacked by something too raw, too ugly to ignore. I didn't rise. I didn't speak. I sat in my chair, hands folded in my lap, letting the silence do my work. Years of erasure, years of being pushed into corners, had taught me the value of stillness. They wanted me invisible. Tonight, I was undeniable. Ethan slammed his glass down, the sound too loud, too desperate. You all don't get it. He was never... But his words were drowned by a low murmur of disappointment spreading across the room, the kind of murmur that stains reputations for good, that lingers long after the music fades. I caught Sarah's eyes across the room. For the first time in years, there was no contempt there, no dismissal, only fear, not of me, not really, but of the truth, laid bare for everyone to see. I leaned back, steady, while the walls they had built for themselves came tumbling down. When the whispers had dulled into a heavy silence, I rose slowly from my chair. The sound of it scraping against the floor seemed louder than the music that had played earlier. Dozens of eyes followed me as I walked toward the center of the hall, not rushed, not hesitant. For once, I didn't feel like a man standing on the outside looking in. I felt like the one in control. I stopped near the head table, close enough for Ethan and Sarah to see me clearly. They were pale, trembling, still clinging to the thin hope that they could talk their way out of this, spin their cruelty into misunderstanding. I let the silence linger, the weight of every pair of eyes pressing down on them. Then I spoke, my voice low but steady. For years I asked myself what I had done to deserve this, to deserve being mocked, erased, tormented by my own blood. I searched every memory, every word I'd spoken, every mistake I might have made. But tonight, I realized I was asking the wrong question. It was never about what I did. It was about who you are. I slipped a folded piece of paper from my jacket pocket and held it up. You see, months ago, I rewrote my will. I thought maybe it was too harsh, too final. But after hearing your laughter, your cruelty, I know it was the right choice. I unfolded the paper slowly, my eyes never leaving theirs. Everything I own, everything your mother and I built, every cent, every acre, none of it goes to you, not a dime. It goes to a foundation in Linda's name, a charity she would have been proud of. Her name will live on. Yours won't. A sharp murmur rippled through the room, louder this time, like a collective gasp that refused to fade. Ethan's face drained of color, his jaw clenching so tight I thought his teeth might crack. Sarah shook her head, her lips parting as if to protest, but no sound came. They were speechless, stripped bare. I refolded the paper, tucked it back into my pocket, and stepped away. My voice carried behind me, cold and final. You cut me out long ago. Tonight, I return the favor. They came after me as I turned, their polished masks shattered beyond repair. Ethan's voice, usually so firm, cracked as it broke through the noise of the hall. Dad, wait, please. He pushed through the crowd, his hand reaching as if to pull me back into the life he'd so easily cast me out of years ago. Sarah followed close behind, her heels clicking sharp against the floor, her eyes wide, desperate, shimmering with tears that weren't there when she laughed at me in the dark. Don't do this, Sarah pleaded, her voice trembling. You can't just erase us. I stopped and turned, the weight of every year pressing into my spine, but for once it didn't bow me down. It made me stand taller. Erase you? I repeated, my voice carrying across the hall. You erased me long before tonight. You cut me out of photographs. You cut me out of holidays, of dinners, of your lives. You made me a ghost in my own family. And now you want to be spared the same fate? Ethan's jaw clenched, his eyes darting around at the faces watching, at the shame closing in on him. We were angry, he stammered. We didn't mean... But I cut him off with a raised hand. You meant every laugh, every word, every ring of that phone in the dead of night. You wanted me broken, and you nearly succeeded. My chest tightened, but the words came steady, sharper than any blade. But you forgot one thing. You taught me what silence feels like, and now it's your turn to live with it. The hall had gone still again. Every guest leaned in, not one person willing to interrupt what had become a reckoning years in the making. Sarah stepped forward, tears streaking her face now, her voice barely above a whisper. Dad, we're sorry. For a moment my throat burned. For a moment I almost let myself believe it was real. But then I remembered the attic, the album, the laughter that echoed through my sleepless nights. I remembered pathetic. I remembered the silence at Linda's grave. And I shook my head. No, you don't get to be sorry when the lights are on and the world is watching. You should have been sorry when I sat alone in the dark, waiting for a call that never came. Their faces crumpled, but I didn't soften. Not this time. The time for forgiveness had long since passed. The wedding carried on around me, though it no longer felt like a wedding at all. The music tried to rise again, laughter tried to return, but it stumbled under the weight of what had just been revealed. My children had vanished from the center of the room, retreating to the shadows they had once forced me into. Only this time, the shadows weren't mine. They were theirs to carry. I didn't stay much longer. I slipped out before the cake was cut, before the dancing began. I walked alone to my truck, the night air cool against my face, the distant hum of music trailing after me until even that was gone. For the first time in years, the silence felt clean, not oppressive, not heavy, but steady, mine. When I stepped inside my house, the stillness wrapped around me like an old blanket. No phone ringing, no cruel laughter bleeding through the wires, just the tick of the clock in the kitchen and the faint creak of the floorboards under my boots. I set my jacket on the chair, the small speaker still tucked in the pocket, silent now, its work complete. I sat at the table, the same spot where I had answered those midnight calls with my heart pounding and my hands shaking. Only tonight, My chest felt lighter. The weight that had pressed on me for years, that had carved me down to bone, was gone. I poured myself a glass of water, the clink of ice against the glass, louder than any laugh that had once haunted me. I thought of Linda then, of the scarf tucked in that attic box, of her perfume that still lingered in the cedar. I imagined her smile, soft and forgiving, the way it always had been. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had honored her, not by striking back with rage, but by reclaiming the dignity her memory deserved. The phone sat on the counter where I had left it days ago, its cord coiled neat and quiet. I glanced at it once, then turned away. It no longer owned me. The calls had ended. The silence was mine again. And for the first time since she was gone, I felt like I could finally rest. Later that night, long after the house had settled and the world outside had gone quiet, I found myself standing in the kitchen again. The clock ticked steady on the wall, a sound that once made me feel small, but now only reminded me that time still belonged to me. The burner phone sat there on the counter, its black screen reflecting the faint light from above. For a while, I just stared at it, hands resting flat against the cool wood of the table. I picked it up, feeling the weight of it, remembering every night it had dragged me from sleep, every laugh that had cut into me like a blade. I turned it over, thumb brushing the buttons, and for a moment I considered smashing it, ending it once and for all. But destruction wasn't what I wanted, not anymore. Instead, I powered it on. The screen flickered to life, blank and waiting. My hand didn't tremble as I dialed the number, my own number. The landline across the room lit up, its shrill ring slicing through the silence. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. The sound echoed through the empty house, bouncing off the walls like a memory that refused to die. I didn't answer. I just stood there, listening. The ring that had once filled me with dread now belonged to me. It was no longer their weapon. It was mine. And as the sound carried on, I realized something simple, something final. Fear is only powerful when you give it space to grow. Tonight, the space was gone. After the 5th ring, I hung up. The landline fell silent. The house was still again. I set the burner phone back on the counter, its screen dark, its power finally spent. I walked to the living room, lowered myself into the chair by the window, and let the silence wrap around me like a second skin. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for anything, not an apology, not a call, not even forgiveness. My children had taught me to fear the sound of a ringing phone. Now, they would spend the rest of their lives fearing it themselves. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening from, because stories like mine, they're never truly over. They just wait for the next ring